I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street.
Happy holidays, guys. It's that time of year again. The time where everybody rushes to Amazon to buy all their shit for all their friends and family. This year, since all of you are now my friends, I'm asking you for a favor. I don't need you to send me anything for Christmas, but I appreciate the thought. What I would like for you to do instead is to do all of your Amazon shopping through Amazon. That's easy, right? I'm not asking too much. There's one thing I'm going to ask you to do. To get to Amazon, I need you to go to fascinationstreetpod.com and click on the Amazon banner on my homepage. Nothing will be any different, and then do all of your Amazon shopping as you normally would. The only difference is that you're walking in through the door that's marked Fascination Street Podcast. It tells Amazon that you love me, and they throw a couple of shekels my way for everything you purchase. That's it. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And happy holidays from Steve Owens and Fascination Street Podcast. From now until December 31st, 2018, the James Beard Foundation is accepting nominations for the 2019 James Beard Awards. And I invite all of you to join me in nominating Chef Stephen McHugh from Cured in San Antonio, Texas, for the 2019 James Beard Award for Best Chef Southwest. I've made it easy to do this, guys. If you go to fascinationstreetpod.com and look to the right of the page, there will be a photo of Chef Stephen McHugh. When you click on that photo, it will take you to the 2019 James Beard Award page. You will need to create an account, but that'll only take about 60 seconds and they don't ask for much. It's really just a name and password kind of a thing. Once you've created an account, it will take you to the nominations page. From there, you'll click on the 2019 Restaurant and Chef Awards, and then complete the submission form, making sure to select Best Chef Southwest as the category. It's that easy, guys. All it takes is 5 minutes of your time, and I would greatly appreciate it. So thank you in advance, and now let's get to this week's episode. Welcome back, folks. Do you remember back in the 70s and 80s, in small towns, when football players played offense and defense? Me either. But I found a lawyer who does a similar thing. This lawyer's name is Paul Skog. He is the city prosecutor for Evanston, Wyoming, and he's a county defender. In addition to playing both sides of the courtroom, Paul is very instrumental in the Jamaican Bobsled Team, making Evanston, Wyoming their North American training ground headquarters. In this episode, we talk about why Paul decided to go to law school, what brought him to Evanston, and how he got involved with the Jamaican Bobsled Team in the first place. Enjoy, guys. This is part 1 of my interview with lawyer and director of operations North America for the Jamaican Bobsled Team, Paul Skog.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Welcome to Fascination Street, Paul Skog. Do I say Esquire?
No.
Aren't you a lawyer?
I hate that designation.
Do you really?
I'm a doctor.
Oh, are you a doctor?
I have a Juris Doctorate degree.
Oh, yeah, you're JD.
I went home one time. My mother was bouncing around the house, and she was going to my younger brother's graduation from veterinary school. And I said, Mom, how come you're so giddy and happy? And she says, well, I'm going to your brother's graduation. I said, well, you've been to other graduations. And she said, yes, but he's graduating from veterinary school. And I said, well, what does that mean? And she says, that means that I have a doctor in the family. And I looked at her and I said, what am I, chopped liver?
What did she say? Did she say you were chopped liver?
No. She said, oh, you are a doctor. You have a Juris Doctorate degree. So I had to remind her I, too, was a doctor.
She said, oh, that's right.
But I've never been fond of that Esquire.
No?
That's self-serving, and I'm not
Indeed. So, I am sitting here in Evanston, Wyoming, on Main Street at the law offices of Paul Skog. I'm saying that right? It's Skog?
Yes.
All right. I've heard people say Skog, but it's Skog.
It's Skog. It's a Swedish word. It means forest.
Really?
Yes. There's a family story there. But
Let's hear it.
my relative who came from Sweden ended up in Minnesota back in the 1800s. And when he arrived, his name was Erickson. And when the immigration people were signing him up, he gave them his name and they said, "We have too many Ericksons. You need to change your name." And so he looked around the forested hills of Minnesota and he chose the word Skog for his name. And that's the family history.
That is so amazing.
Yeah.
Wasn't there I want to say it was Leif Erikson, like a famous explorer?
He's credited with finding North America before Columbus. Yeah.
Well, I mean, to be fair, it really wasn't lost, right? Like, there was already a bunch of people who found it.
That's true. Discovering, I guess, is the word. Or rediscovering.
Rediscovering. All right. I think you said earlier you are born and, I guess, raised in Omaha, Nebraska.
Correct.
Tell me about Omaha.
Omaha's a wonderful town. I grew up there in the 60s and the 70s and went to college in Lincoln. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Omaha. It's a wonderful place to grow up. It's a wonderful place to raise a family. The only downside to Omaha is the heat and humidity in the summertime. My grandparents had a cabin in the mountains in Wyoming, and I used to spend time in the summer visiting them. And I fell in love with mountains, so I left Omaha.
In the mountains near here, where we are, in Evanston?
They were in north central Wyoming.
Where are we?
We're in the southwest corner.
Southwest. Okay.
We're 4 miles to the Utah border. And
Gotcha.
they were up about an hour to the Montana border.
Okay. Awesome. Sean and I drove through the Uintas?
Uintas.
Through the Uintas Mountains yesterday, and it was gorgeous. I think we were up about 11,000 feet or so.
Uh-huh.
And it was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. I must have taken 500 pictures. It was amazing. I didn't see any bears this time, though. Did see some cows in the middle of the road, which I thought was a little odd. Yeah, there's signs that say, be careful, there's cows in the middle of the road.
Yeah,
I know it's a lot to fit on a sign, but they do it with pictures. It was still a little bit alarming. I'm curious how sure-footed are these cows that they're climbing up mountains? Because I've seen them in some pretty precarious spots since I've been here, and I don't think I could do it, and I'm wearing tennis shoes.
Well, I'm not a rancher, so I can't answer that question.
Oh.
So,
all right.
You could probably ask my brother, the veterinarian.
Well, this interview is over. So you're growing up in Omaha, Nebraska. Oh, and by the way, I know you said that the big thing there is football, but also they have a pretty far-reaching and, I guess, important music scene there now.
Oh, they do.
And probably for about the last at least 15 years. It's real big alternative sort of pop punk, like Cursive and Connor Oberst is the dude. He's in a couple of bands, but he has a record company in there. So Omaha is kind of a big deal as far as.
Well, I've watched Omaha. I mean, I've kept in touch through the newspaper and now the internet, and I just watched it change, especially the downtown area. When I was a boy, the downtown area, of course, it's right on the Missouri River, and there were lots of big, tall storage buildings, warehouse buildings. In those days, warehouses went up. And nowadays, warehouses are spread out over acreage so that forklifts can move everything around.
What were they using before?
Manual labor. Some forklifts.
Hand trucks and stuff like that.
Hand trucks. And then my folks were in the furniture business, so I often went to some of those warehouses to pick up the furniture, and they had these big, huge elevators that would go to the, up and down. And
freight elevators. You see them on TV all the time.
Freight elevators. But what they've done is they have renovated along the Missouri River. They've taken out the old docks and things, and they've put in business campuses. They've made green spaces. You could never reach the Missouri River when I was a kid. I mean, you drive towards it and eventually the roads would stop. But now you can actually walk down to the river. They put a beautiful pedestrian bridge over the Missouri from Omaha to Council Bluffs, Iowa.
Oh, okay.
It's right across the river. And
Gotcha.
There's major bridges, but now there's a pedestrian bridge across there.
Is it a massive pedestrian bridge?
It is.
There's one in in Louisville that goes from like downtown Louisville to somewhere in Indiana. I don't remember what's on the other side, but it goes over the, I think it's the Ohio River.
Mm-hmm.
That pedestrian bridge, it's got to be 2 miles long if it's an inch. It's massive.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Man, is it big. So you're growing up in Omaha, where the roads end before you can get to the river. When did you decide that you wanted to be an attorney?
Well, I went to Lincoln. I was in business college, University of Nebraska, and actually it was the start of my senior year. I had the fortune of having my parents cover 99% of my college costs. I like to say that I was on the parental grant program. They came out of World War II. They were both college educated. My dad received the benefits of the GI Bill. He got a business degree, and ultimately they opened up a furniture store in Omaha. And so I had a business background. They shared responsibilities. My mother did the accounting. My father was the salesman. My brothers and I were the delivery people. And so I just had this business background. So I went to Lincoln, went to business college, and in my senior year, I was realizing that my college days were coming to an end, and I began to think, how could I extend my college days? And, of course, my first thought was, gee, I could become a doctor. And I thought, no, I can't be a doctor. I haven't even taken any kind of science classes. And then I thought about getting a master's degree in business, and I thought, no, I'll end up being a stock boy at a Kmart. And the third choice, suddenly the light went off, and I said to myself, I could go to law school. So within the month, first week of October, I was taking the LSAT. It happened to be on a game day, started at 8 in the morning, ended at noon, and outside in the parking lot was the Nebraska Cornhusker Marching Band warming up for the football game that day.
During your test?
During the test. So I got done with the test at noon, and this would have been 74. Back in those days, college games were 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and ABC aired most of the football games. So I walked across the street, walked right into the football stadium, sat down in my seat and had hot dog and whatever and watched the game and forgot about the law school admissions exam. And applied to Nebraska, and about February of my senior year, I got to thinking maybe I should have applied to more than one law school. And then in March, the letter came from the University of Nebraska that I'd been accepted. So went to law school. Never looked back. Law school was tough, a lot of reading. Law school teaches you to think in terms of gray, and the words what if become extremely important. What if we change this fact? What if we change this factor? What will the outcome be, or what should the outcome be? And so they really teach you to think in gray. Whereas an engineer, for instance, will think in black and white, or an accountant will think in black. 2 plus 2 is 4. And of course, if you ask a lawyer, how much is 2 plus 2? He looks around the room, he goes and opens the door, looks in the hallway, goes to the window, looks through the blinds, draws the blinds, he comes back to you and he says, how much do you want it to be? So that's what they teach you in law school. How much do you want it to be?
Did your parents pay for law school?
They did.
Wow.
They were wonderful people. They, as I say, they came out of World War II. My mother had a teaching degree. My father had his business degree. And I'm absolutely certain their goal was they wanted their children to be educated. My oldest brother has a master's degree in finance. My next brother has a master's degree in architecture. I'm the lawyer in the family. And my youngest brother, the doctor of the family, he's the veterinarian.
Wow.
So they established, I'm convinced. I remember sitting at my father's desk, and I opened the middle drawer, and there was a row of silver dollars and where the pencils and pens. And I must have been 5 or 6 years old, and I said, silver dollars, what are these for, Dad? And I remember him saying, they're for your education. Education is the silver bullet. It's what we need. It's what we should have in this country. I'm very proud of that fact. Very, very proud of that.
You should be. And are your parents both passed?
They're both passed.
Well, I hope that you sent them out very well, because that is a mighty accomplishment.
Well, I followed in their path. I have 3 boys, and the oldest is a lawyer. The youngest is no longer with us. He had cystic fibrosis. But before he passed at the age of 25, he graduated the University of Wyoming summa cum laude. He was a double major with a 4.0 in French and philosophy. His other brother is involved in GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And so I did the same thing my parents did. I set money aside.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you saved silver dollars.
No, they stopped making silver.
Wow. Well, that is fantastic, sir. Nicely done.
Thank you.
When did you decide which side of the law you were going to be on?
Well, in terms of sides of the law, I came to Wyoming because I was hired to be a deputy county attorney, a prosecutor. And so I started my legal career in criminal law on the side of the government as a prosecuting attorney. I did that for about 8 years and decided it was time to open a private practice. When I opened the private practice, of course, my skills were in criminal law, so I just kind of switched over and became a criminal defense attorney. And most of my professional life has been involved with criminal law, one way or the other. I still do prosecution work, City of Evanston. I have a contract with them to be their prosecutor. And at the same time, I still take criminal defense cases, so long as they do not involve Evanston Police Department. Most of my work still is criminal law.
So that reminds me of back in the day in small towns, and maybe still, football players would play both sides of the ball. Yeah. And so I feel like that's fairly unique for a lawyer to be both a prosecutor and a defense attorney.
I think if you look into people's backgrounds, you'll find that often they start as a prosecutor, then go into private practice.
Sure.
And they'll still do criminal defense work. They may have other areas just to build business. For me, I've been fortunate because the city offered me the contract to do the prosecuting.
And how long have you been a city prosecutor?
I've been a city prosecutor. I'm in my 12th year
as
the city prosecutor. It surprises me, too. But I enjoy city prosecution. City court, in my opinion, is the closest you get to having a people's court. Of course, people get tickets for all sorts of things, jaywalking, barroom fights, of course, traffic citations, speeding, and they come to court. Of course, your first opportunity in court is to plead guilty or not guilty. If they plead not guilty, then they get an opportunity to talk with me if they want to. They don't have to talk to me. They have protections. The foremost is the Fifth Amendment, but generally they come in and they talk with me, and I go through the case report with them, and we usually work out something to resolve the matter. There's 2 ways to resolve a criminal case. Well, there's 2 ways to resolve any kind of legal case. You can have it decided by a judge at a trial, or you can resolve it by some kind of mutual agreement. So I usually propose an agreement, and that's the process of plea bargaining. Give them the opportunity to make changes or amendments. I'll listen. And many, many cases are resolved by the plea bargain process. I think I mentioned that I was a county state prosecutor early in my career, and I like to think that over the years I've grown a little bit kinder and gentler. I see both sides of cases. The funny thing in my career, I haven't come across what I would call truly evil people. I've come across maybe 3 or 4 in my career, then they are evil. They are just bad people who have done bad things. But many, many people, like a jaywalker, even your typical DUI, many of those are first-time offenders. And they just don't understand what alcohol does. Laws are intended to prohibit behavior. You are not to drive when you're unsafe to drive because you've drunk alcohol. So that's a prohibition. Well, the first thing that goes out the window when you consume alcohol is your prohibitions. And people just find themselves driving. And the laws today for drunk driving have really been, the loopholes have all been filled in. It's a very important area of criminal law for people's safety. But they're not evil people. They just find themselves in a first-time situation. And they get an education, and hopefully the idea is they get that education. It doesn't happen to them again. I like to think of it that way anyway.
I like it. So that's what brought you to Wyoming.
Yes.
You got offered this amazing job.
In the mountains.
In the mountains.
And that's the beauty of Evanston. You were talking about going south of town and going over the Uintas. The Uintas are the longest running east to west chain of mountains in the North American continent. They run east to west. Then they intersect with the Wasatch, forming a T formation. The beauty of Evanston is we live to the north of the Uintas and to the east of the Wasatch. And so the beauty of Evanston is its proximity to everything. Within a half an hour, you're in the most beautiful mountains that you can imagine. And driving along, you take the kids down for a Sunday cook-off, and you're home again by 6 o'clock at night.
Yeah, I noticed that there is, I think they call it the Utah Navy or something like that. There was just a veritable wagon train of RVs coming out of those mountains. I must have seen 400 RVs.
Oh, I bet you saw more than that. Yes.
I was telling my wife that the RV dealerships just need to set up right there on that street and make a commercial, because it's every kind of RV you could imagine is coming out of there.
Yeah. And in our case, since we live here, those are the people from the Salt Lake Valley. They come up, and it's the Salt Lake Army, the ones with the trailers and the little four-wheel drive vehicles, and then there's the Salt Lake Navy or the Utah Navy, and they're headed to Flaming Gorge, which is about an hour and a half to the east of us, or they're going up to Bear Lake, which is an hour to the north. So yeah, we get a lot of people through here during the summertime. You learn not to be on the road on a Friday afternoon or on a Sunday afternoon.
Or on a Monday that is a holiday in the late afternoon, as we discovered yesterday.
Yeah.
So when you got here and you're setting up your life, your wife, your kids, your practice, what was it about Wyoming that made you stick around after your initial contract was up?
The interesting thing about Wyoming, and a lot of people don't realize this, is it's a huge state land-wise, but a small state in population. The total population is somewhere around 500,000. That's less than a lot of suburbs of major cities.
That's less than half of San Antonio.
Right. And you just get to know people. And Wyoming still has the luxury of taking its time to do things and to do things right. You get to know people when something needs to be done in this town. This town is a prime example. I came to this town and there was a huge oil boom on. That's why I was hired. There was an oil and gas boom on, and I had learned that...
This would have been the late 80s?
This would have been the early 80s, 83.
Early 80s, okay.
83. The boom had started in the late 70s, and one of the first things that the town fathers did in this town was they established, in essence, a trust fund, a nonprofit organization that was a trust fund, and they asked all of the oil company to put money in this fund. It was called the Impact Association, the Oil Field Impact Association. And then that association basically handed out money to primarily governmental entities, which is why we have a new courthouse. It's now 30 years old, but newer than it was. We have a new town hall. We have a new police station, new fire department. Almost all of the schools are new within the last 30 years. And
this is all oil money from the early 80s?
This is all oil money from the early 80s. In other words, they spent the money wisely, and they built the infrastructure that was needed to accommodate this inrush of people. And I actually missed the worst of the boom. The worst of the boom was the young oil field male worker who lived in what they called man camps. Companies would put a bunch of trailers together, and they would have 3 or 4 trailers linked to be the main cafeteria and recreational center, sort of like a wagon train in circle. I mean, they would put the main complex in the middle, and then they'd put all of these trailers that could accommodate people to work in these camps. And by the time I got here, most of those camps had disappeared. Other housing had come along. A lot of the construction workers had left. But I heard that, like in downtown, you were a female, a lot of catcalls and whistles and even more than that. And the downtown section was a rough area. You kind of stayed away from it. A lot of these young male construction workers, three things to spend money on: alcohol, car stereos, cars, and other, shall we say, illegal activities. It was just a rough area for a few years. But the town, as I say, the town was building its infrastructure to accommodate all of this. We have that new family recreation center. That's symbolic of Wyoming. Wyoming, we're spread out, but we get to know each other. My job here, criminal defense, I do work in towns to the east of us, and the towns are all about 100 miles apart along Interstate 80. To the east, you have Green River Rock Springs, about 100 miles away. And then beyond that, you have Rawlins, another 100 miles away. Then you have Laramie, another 100 miles away. And finally, you have Cheyenne, another 100 miles away, roughly, in between the cities. And there aren't too many states that I can think of that are kind of set up that way.
So you do business in all of those towns?
I do. Telephone. They now have video conferencing for some of the courts. We are progressive in that way, is that our state structure got into video conferencing early, grabbed onto it, and like the Supreme Court of Wyoming passed rules on how to use video conferencing.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. We have I don't want to call it the good old boy system. It's just more like it's a system where people know each other and can communicate. And I like that a lot, that we can communicate, that the communication goes well. It doesn't get, screwed up along the way. And that's what I like about Wyoming. And, of course, the natural beauty of Wyoming. 3 hours from here and you're in Jackson, and another hour beyond that and you're at Yellowstone. Where my grandparents lived up in Sheridan, Wyoming, you were an hour away from the Little Bighorn battlefield. Of course, 2 hours to the east of where my grandparents were was the famous Devil's Tower, the first national monument established by...
Wait, is that the one from...
Yes. Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
That's how far away?
About 2 hours from where my grandparents were.
How far away is it from me?
Oh, it's about 9 hours from here.
All right.
It's fascinating. It is a fascinating structure. I saw it originally. This would be in the early 60s. We'd get on the train at 11 o'clock at night. I think we rode it about 3 or 4 times, 62 to 66. But you'd leave it at 11 o'clock at night. You'd end up in western Nebraska at 8 in the morning. You'd get off the train, you'd cross over the street, and there was usually a hotel right across from the train station. We would go in and have breakfast, and as a little kid, I was always worried about the train leaving. And they were converting the Pullman back to day coach. And we'd get done with our breakfast, and my dad would be reading the paper, and I'd be scared to death we were going to miss the train. And we'd cross back over, get on the train, and it took until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon then to get to Sheridan, Wyoming. So it was a interesting way to travel, but it was fun knowing that I did it in those days.
It sounds really cool to do a cross-country trip on a train.
It
just sounds amazing.
It's a shame that our country hasn't spent more money on high-speed trains in the West. Countries like Japan and Europe, not that that's a country, but Europe itself, they have these high-speed trains that travel at, 300 miles an hour. Our trains are traveling at 100 miles an hour, if that.
If that, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having high-speed trains out here in the West.
Where would you go?
Where would I go? Everywhere.
Yeah?
I think the first place I'd go is northwest, up to Seattle, Vancouver, into the Rockies, the Canadian Rockies. And the second place I'd go to Washington, D.C. I'd take the train to Washington, D.C. I've been to Washington, D.C. a couple of times, and I guess because I'm a lawyer and because that's the heart of our government, I just enjoy seeing Washington.
On your wall, there is a framed certificate that says Supreme Court State of Colorado.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Every state has jurisdiction over their lawyers.
Right.
It's called the bar system.
Sure.
I, of course, graduated from law school in Nebraska. I took the Nebraska bar exam, and I passed it, became a member of the Nebraska bar. And then when I came to Wyoming, I had to take a second exam to become a member of the Wyoming bar. But they also have, after so many years of practicing law, many states now have what they call reciprocity rules. I went through the reciprocity process and became a member of the Colorado bar. And it actually worked in my favor because for a year I practiced law in Colorado in the town of Broomfield. Before I went into private practice, we moved to the Denver area, my wife and I and our kids, and I was an assistant city attorney for the city of Broomfield. And the thing that I learned in that year is that I liked Evanston more than I did Denver. And so that's when my wife and I made a huge decision to come back and set up a private practice.
I bet that was a big decision.
It was.
So let's fast forward to the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cult movie called Cool Runnings, which is about, I guess it's about the first Jamaican bobsled team.
It is.
Shortly after that, all of a sudden you come into the picture. Explain how you got involved and why.
Well, let me give you the history, quick history of the Jamaican bobsled.
Does not have to be quick.
Okay.
Give me the slow history.
1988, the Calgary Winter Olympics. There were a couple of rich businessmen in Jamaica. I'm told that they were actually American businessmen who had business interests in Jamaica. And I'm told that they were sitting around enjoying a cocktail or two, and that they were watching the pushcart derby. Now, the pushcart is the very first part of the movie, Cool Runnings. Pushcarts are used in Jamaica by merchants with primarily tourism to sell things. They'll push their carts around. They'll have food carts. They'll have clothing carts. They'll have perfume carts. They'll have shell carts. But they push these carts around, and they're selling goods primarily to tourists. And someone came up with the idea of making those into a derby and modifying them so that they could push them down a hill and race each other. The pushcart derby. And that's the first part of the movie in Cool Runnings, is the pushcart. Well, these guys were supposedly saw the pushcarts, and they became, I guess, intoxicated enough that they started making bets, and they started discussing how Jamaicans had some of the greatest natural athletes in the world. Usain Bolt, of course, is an example of that. He came along much later, but their discussion primarily was about Jamaican athletes. And they made a bet, and the bet was that they could take on any sport and they could do well at it. And because the pushcart derby was right there, they came up with the idea of putting together the very first Jamaican bobsled team.
Which is unusual because they have a pretty low snowfall.
They have, yes. Even in Hawaii, they have snow. But I don't think Jamaica has any snow. That's how the idea came about. Now, in the movie has some Olympic summer athletes, and they're running in a race, and they trip each other, and they fall to the ground. And they want to get to the Olympics so badly. Their drive is to get to the Olympics. One of them has a connection. His father was an Olympic runner, and his father had met an Olympic bobsledder, and that bobsledder was played by John Candy, and he was now disgraced. But in any event, I go into too much detail. So these American businessmen, they go to the Jamaican Tourism Bureau, and they say, we think that this idea will promote Jamaica, interest in Jamaica. And so they go to the athletes, and the athletes, the Olympic athletes, the runners, the sprinters, they turn down the idea. So I'm told they then turned towards the Jamaican Defense Force. They went to the commanders of various locations, and the members of the Jamaican Army, the Jamaican Defense Force, came out, and they went down the row, and they said, you just volunteered for the Jamaican Bobsled Team. You. And they just went down the row, and they got 30 such volunteers. And at first, even they thought this is a crazy idea. But as they realized that it was possible to go to the Winter Olympics, I'm told again that these volunteers from the Jamaican Defense Force became very competitive. They were all, of course, young, healthy, good athletes in their own rights. That's why they were picked by the commanders. And they began to compete against each other for these spots in the very first Jamaican bobsled team. And the first spot they filled was the captain and the driver, also known as the pilot. And it happened to be a man, Dudley Talmadge Stokes, known as Tal Stokes. He was a captain, I believe, and he was a helicopter pilot. And they said, if you're a helicopter pilot, your skills should transfer over to being a pilot of the bobsled. So there's the first guy, the team captain, Tal Stokes. Then they picked the others. They were putting together a 4-man team, so they picked 2 side pushers and the brakeman, who's also a pusher. How they came about picking those guys, I'm not sure of, but they ended up with 4 or 5 people. And eventually they went to Calgary. Now, in those days, you didn't even have to go on the racing circuit. You had to meet competitive qualifications. But bobsledding at that time was not as big as it is now, and there was plenty of room to put them on the schedule. And so they ended up on the schedule. They went to Calgary. The movie, of course, portrays them as being put down by other teams. But in reality, they were well received by the other teams. Everybody was helpful. Everybody donated things, donated some equipment, donated helpful hints, coaching advice, things like that.
Really? The other teams?
It was just the opposite of what the Disney movie. The Disney movie had them all as being outcast and not wanted. But no, they were well received. I'm told that they were well received. So they raced. And it turns out that Dudley, the helicopter pilot, the big event was that he crashed. And I guess... A
helicopter?
No, a bobsled. And I guess if you're going to crash, you need to crash spectacularly so that you're well remembered.
If you're going to do it right.
If you're going to do it, even when it comes to crashing, yes, do it right. And that's what Dudley Stokes did. He crashed at the Olympics. And the team then became the darlings of the 88 Calgary Olympics. They were just well received by the crowd.
Now, if I remember the movie correctly, they crashed in the movie. Was it a similar looking crash?
The movie itself used the actual film footage from the 88 Olympics. So yeah, if you're watching the movie, you're seeing the film footage that was the original team. There's one interesting scene. It struck me. I remember it striking me the very first time I saw the movie in the theater. The sled is on its side. It comes around a corner, and the driver's head is literally cocked up against the wall of the track, and it looks like he's got a broken neck. And I remember thinking, oh, man, that guy looks like he has a broken neck. That was Tal Stokes. He was the driver. His head hit the wall. It was in that cocked position. And I believe he was knocked unconscious, and he suffered a concussion. Now, the movie has the guys all getting out of the sled, and the goal is just to finish the race, to prove to the world that they can finish the race. They supposedly pick up the sled, put it on their shoulders, and walk it across the finish line. Now, in reality, what happened was track workers climbed over the sides of the track, uprighted the sled on its runners, and they pushed it in. Now, Tal was taken away in an ambulance.
Who pushed it in?
The workers, the track workers. And now the team members, one team member was in front. His name is Devin Harris, and he was walking in front, and the other 2 team members were behind the sled. And as the track workers are pushing the sled towards the finish line, they're walking along, and you can see the look in Devin's face. We crashed. This is a bad thing. And he just really looks downcast. And all of a sudden, like the movie, the crowd starts clapping. And you can see the look on Devin's face.
You can make me cry, dude.
It is better than the movie because he looks at the crowd, he sees them clapping. The expression on his face changes from one of disgrace to one of surprise. I have to think to myself that at that moment, the words went through his head, if you're going to crash, crash spectacularly. And at that moment, I think he realized that no matter what they did, they were still athletes, they were still representing their country, and the world had fallen in love with them. And the world is still in love with them. And so I've seen the full footage. Of course, it was cut up for the movie, but I've seen the full footage showing Devin Harris walking and that expression changing on his face. And to me, that's even better than the movie. So they finished the race. I think they were disqualified, but they finished the 88 Olympics. And then as the end of the movie says, they came back 4 years later to Albertville. Albertville, France was the 92 Olympics. And they did well. Well, the best place they've ever had.
Where the hell is Albertville?
Well, it's an area of France, and it was spread all over, and the Olympic sites were all over in the mountains. And
Gotcha.
That's all I know about Albertville. And so that was in 92. Now, the movie came out in 93, and the Olympics changed their schedule. They moved the Winter and Summer Olympics apart by 2 years. So they put in an extra Olympics in 94, an extra Winter Olympics in 94. And that was in Lillehammer. Now, I believe it was in Lillehammer where they did their best. The 4-man team came in 15th or 16th out of about 30 places, and they actually beat the United States, and they beat a couple of other big countries at the Lillehammer Olympics.
This is 90.
This is 94. And I saw the movie. I fell in love with the movie. I always like to say that the movie Cool Runnings is the Rocky of bobsledding movies.
100%.
And then I point out that it's really the only movie about bobsledding.
100%.
Now, there are some scenes in various James Bond movies that show bobsledding, but there's never been a movie just solely about the subject matter being bobsledding. I remember that feeling, and the feeling was, it doesn't matter if you win. What matters is the work you put in to doing it and trying and doing your best that you can and accepting the results. You don't have to win to be a winner, and that's what they were. So they were the underdogs. Now, Evanston is a bit of an underdog. We're in the southwest corner. People in Cheyenne, the state capital, we're all the way across the state from them, so we don't get much attention from Cheyenne. We're 4 miles to Utah. We're 90 minutes to Salt Lake City. We don't get a lot of respect from the people in Utah. They seem to think our name is Evanston. They add an ing to it. And when you go shopping down in Salt Lake City, if they happen to ask where you're from, and you say Evanston, they seem to think that Evanston is like an 8-hour drive away because their reaction usually is, oh, you came all that way to shop with us today? I always have to remind them that we're only an hour away. So I had this, maybe I had a feeling about Evanston not being respected. So along comes the 2002 Olympics, and that brings us to 1997. And I think it was maybe in 96. Early 97, Salt Lake City is awarded the bid for the 2002 Winter Olympics. I'm looking around going, that is something to have the Olympics coming to your back door.
I mean, the Olympics are going to be 90 minutes away from your house. How cool is that?
Well, actually, the downhill events were only 45 minutes from my house.
Whoa.
And that was my thought. That was cool. The world is coming to my doorstep. This historical moment in time is going to be 45 minutes away from me and my town. And the thought came to me, how can we get involved? How can the town get involved? How can the kids get involved? This is a historic occasion, the 2002 Olympics. And it was like, thank you, Utah. Thank you for getting the bid and winning the Olympics. And I kept hearing the words, the Salt Lake City Olympics, the Salt Lake City Olympics. And I kept thinking, it's not the Salt Lake City Olympics. It's the 2002 Winter Olympics, and it encompasses a huge area, including Evanston. So I thought, how do we get involved? We're across the state line, but how do we get involved? And because of the movie, literally the only answer I can give you is that I woke up one morning and I said, I wonder where the Jamaican bobsled team trains. I wonder if there still is a Jamaican bobsled team. The internet was new at that time. I located a phone number for the Jamaican Olympic Committee, and I called my telephone company to see how much it would cost to call Jamaica. It was 65 cents a minute in those days. And I said to myself, in for a penny, in for a pound.
In for 65 pennies, in for a really long conversation.
So I called the Jamaican Olympic Committee, and my question was, there was a young woman on the other end, and my question was, do you folks still have a Jamaican bobsled team? And the answer came back, oh yeah, man, we do. We have a Jamaica Bobsled Federation. That's the governing body of the team. And she was very pleasant, and she readily gave me the phone number of the president of the federation. His name was Christian Stokes.
The whole time were you like, oh, talk faster, lady. This is 65 cents a minute.
No, I wasn't too worried. I was not really worried. I just wanted to know how much it would cost. But I had a pleasant conversation. That's when I learned that every sport has a governing body, and usually the body is referred to as some kind of federation. In this case, it was the Jamaica Bobsleigh Federation. With their history and connection to England, they preferred the English word bobsleigh over the American version bobsled. And so it was the Jamaica Bobsleigh Federation. The president was Christian Stokes, and Chris is the brother of Tal Stokes. And that's a whole nother story that I won't go into, how he got involved in the team. But Chris at that time was the president, and she gave me the phone number. He was the vice president of a savings and loan. Later, I learned that he went to college at the University of Idaho in Moscow and got a business degree. Then he went back and got a master's degree at, I think it was in Spokane, in Washington, got a master's degree in finance. And that's how he happened to be around for the 88 Olympics. And he went up to watch the Olympics. One of the team members had dislocated his shoulder in a practice run. So Tal turned to Chris and said, you're the only Jamaican athlete within 1,000 miles. You are now a member of the Jamaican bobsled team.
Oh, wow.
And it was like 3 days before the team ran that Chris became a member of the Jamaican bobsled team with his brother Tal. So by this time, by 97, Chris is the president of the federation. Chris and Tal went on to race together in 92 Albertville. They were on that 15th or 16th place team in 94 at Lillehammer. And they were actually getting ready for the Nagano Games. This was January of 97. The Nagano Games were 1 year away. So I called the number.
That's in Japan.
And that was in Japan. So I called the number for Chris Stokes. A female assistant answers, and again, very pleasant. And I ask if he is in, and her answer was, Mr. Stokes is off island right now. And of course, I'd never heard the expression being off island. And later I learned that Chris was at a race, a World Cup race, being held in Nagano, Japan. It was 1 year out, and they were making sure the track was ready for the Olympics. And so he was actually in Nagano when I first called. I explained my idea to the secretary that we have this small town, 45 minutes to the bobsled track at Park City, Utah. And the idea was, would they be interested in using Evanston, Wyoming as a training base?
I know that obviously they were going to have the Olympics there, but was that track already there, or did they build it for the Olympics?
Okay, they built it for the Olympics.
And they had it ready that soon?
Yes, that's really astounding because
it's amazing.
They were,
especially like with the Sochi, they didn't have anything ready like the day before.
And they were still painting walls up at the venue in Vancouver for the 2010 Olympics. There's a lot to be said for the Utahns. They did an excellent job
So is it actually in Salt Lake City?
No, the track itself is at Park City.
Okay.
And Park City, of course, is a big ski resort.
Is Park City where they have the Sundance Film Festival?
It is.
Man, that was fast.
It was. It was. They built this track. They had it up and running. And in fact, what really caught my attention, there was a story in the paper in January of 97 that the track was up and running, that they were holding the grand opening ceremonies for the track. I'd had this idea in my brain about becoming involved in the 2002 Olympics. And that's when I decided in for a penny, in for a pound. And I called and I got what I got. And so back to telling Chris Stokes' assistant, and I asked her, I said, do you think Mr. Stokes would be interested in that? And she responded that she thought he would be very interested in hearing from me. She gave me his email address. And so I emailed him. And I don't know when the first time I really was talked to him on the phone, but most of our communication was through email. I learned that for the 98 games, they were trying to send 2 teams, and that their number 1 team was training in Calgary. However, the number 2 team, due to a lack of funding, needed some financial assistance. And so he turned the idea of Evanston, Wyoming, being a training base over to the team captain for Jamaica 2, and that was Devin Harris.
Oh, okay.
The man that I mentioned earlier walking up at the Calgary Olympics. So he turned the idea over to Devin. Devin had gone from being a pusher, had gone to driving school. You actually have to go to a number of driving schools, and you have to be certified to be a driver of a bobsled before they let you go down the track.
Interesting.
And Devin had done that, and he had formed his own Jamaica 2. And so I started communicating with Devin. Now, Devin lived in New York City at the time, but his teammates were in Jamaica, the team that he had put together. And I proposed to Devin this idea of using Evanston, Wyoming as a training base. Now, at this point in time, it's about February, we're into March of 97. Devin and I decide that we should have a meet and greet session where some of the team could fly into Salt Lake and come up to Evanston, and the town could meet them and they could meet the town. And so the idea developed to have a meet and greet. Well, at this point in time, I've done all my communications without authorization. I just had this idea. And the idea was based on the theory that we have a great town and that we have generous people and giving people and willing people and helpful people. That was the whole idea. I had the idea, but it was based on that we have a great town.
So you did all of this communicating without telling anybody official in the town.
That's right.
So I guess it's sort of behind everybody's back.
I don't know if it was behind their back. It was just an idea I had, and I wanted to see how far I could go.
Yeah, you didn't want to bring it to their attention until it was looking fruitful.
So Devin and I make arrangements, or we come to the conclusion we need to have this meet and greet. I was carrying in my shirt pocket the emails.
You printed them out? Or
I printed them out, and I had them in my shirt pocket. And I knew the mayor, Will Davis, because you're a small town, because it's Wyoming, you know people. So when I ran into Will, I said, Will, I've been in touch with the Jamaican Bobsled Team.
He was like, from the movie?
I said, I've been talking to them about coming here and using Evanston as a training base, as a home away from home. And of course, we both knew the Olympics were coming. He knew what I was talking about. And his first reaction was he shook his head, and it was like he was clearing his head. He couldn't believe his ears, and he says, repeat that. What did you just say? And I said, Will, I've been talking.
He's like, no, after that.
I've been communicating.
I said, Will, I want to talk to you.
I've been communicating with the Jamaican Bobsled Team. I have them interested in coming to Evanston, using us as a training base. What do you think of that idea? And of course, he thought highly of that idea. We discussed it further. Then he asked, so what do you need from me? And I said, well, I need money. We've come to this idea that we should have a meet and greet weekend. Devin, the team captain, should fly in with a couple of his teammates, and we'll set up some type of meetings, and they can meet town leaders and you, and we'll just put something together. I'm referring to it as a meet and greet weekend. And of course, being the mayor, he did have some money set aside for such things. Oh, I had to show Will the emails to convince him I was...
Did he think you were crazy?
Yeah, a little bit. We made arrangements to do it the first weekend in May, and they're to fly in on Thursday evening. And then we'd have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and they were to fly back on Monday. And everything is set. And by this time, of course, the newspapers found out about it. We have a Tuesday edition and a Friday edition. And they ran the story that the Jamaican bobsled team was coming to Evanston. And what we had done was we simply said there would be an informal gathering at a local institution known as Kate's Bar.
That's just down the street from here, right?
Correct. And the idea was just to keep it informal. If you'd like to meet members of the Jamaican bobsled team, come to Kate's Thursday night. But just before the news came out, Devin gets a hold of me. It was like Sunday night, and I'll never forget his words. Paul, we have a bit of a problem, but I don't want you to think of it as a problem because we'll resolve it. I am dedicated to coming to Evanston. I am dedicated. I will be there in Evanston, but we have a bit of a problem. Well, what the problem turned out to be was the Federation had booked Devin into a radio show. And the radio show turned out to be an interview with Howard Stern. And what I learned was that was going to be on Friday morning.
Uh-oh.
And I said, well, you can't do that. I've already got the tickets. They've already been paid for. They're non-refundable. You can't do this. You can't do this. As it turned out, Devin, one of the greatest guys you can imagine, Devin kept reassuring me that it would all work out, that he was dedicated to coming to Evanston. And so what they worked out was when you're on the Howard Stern show, they put you up in a hotel, and they come and get you at 4 o'clock in the morning. And your taping is like at 6 or 7 in the morning. And so he was able to catch the Friday plane. And then it turned out that the Federation and or the Howard Stern show ended up paying for the airline tickets.
The difference?
Not the difference. They refunded our money.
Oh.
And then the Howard Stern show or the Federation or both, they ended up paying for the tickets for the 3 guys to come. So we still had this little pot of money, and now we have the Jamaicans coming. So it did go into the Tuesday paper that the Jamaicans would arrive on Friday. Their plane was due in at like 5 o'clock and that they'd probably be in Evanston by 7 o'clock. And if you wanted to meet and greet the Jamaican bobsled team, there would be an informal gathering at the Kate's Bar in downtown Evanston, Wyoming. There for a while, I really felt like I was going to be Charlie Brown with Lucy pulling the football out from underneath.
Until you saw them, I'm sure you felt that way.
I felt that way. So we did make the arrangements. Devin came through as he had promised. The plane arrived. The local Chevy dealer gave us a brand new Suburban to go pick him up in. We pick him up, we put him in the Suburban. I was with a good friend of mine here in town, another attorney, and he rode along just to keep me company, and because it was the Jamaican bobsled team we were picking up. Of course, we drove right past the bobsled track, and I pointed it out to him. I said, that's where the bobsled track is, and then we headed on the other 45 minutes to Evanston, and we got in right on time, about 7 o'clock, and parked right in front of Kate's. There was a parking spot, and I pulled in with the Suburban. And, of course, I jumped out and stretched my legs for a second or two, and I walked into Kate's. It was wall-to-wall people, probably over maximum capacity. I couldn't believe how packed it was. And I turned around, and I couldn't believe the Jamaican bobsled team was not with me. I had come through the door by myself.
Hilarious.
And there I was looking at all of these people, And I turned around, there was nobody with me, and I went back out to the sidewalk. They had been on a plane for 4 hours. They'd been in the Suburban, and they were stretching, and they were smelling the fresh air, and they were listening to the birds, and it was a beautiful sunset. So I stood there, and they stretched, and when they were ready, then I walked through the door, and they came in behind me. And the thing that I remember was the noise. The noise in that bar increased by tenfold. It was like I had brought the Denver Broncos to town. I couldn't believe how welcomed they were. I mean, they couldn't have received a better reception. Of course, they were young and healthy and handsome, and young ladies were going so far as to raising their T-shirts and saying, sign my bra, autograph my bra. And my wife came over to me, and I remember her words. She says, you know, you're sitting here and you look like the cat that swallowed the canary. And I said, yeah, isn't it fun? And, you know, so I wasn't Charlie Brown. The football did not get pulled out from underneath me. And it was, you know, one of the nicest occasions I'd ever been at. I just sat there and I watched and I enjoyed. So about 10 o'clock, I gathered up the guys and I said, you know, I think we should go check into the hotel. Devin had been up since 4 o'clock doing the Howard Stern show.
Who were the other guys?
Patrick Robinson was a brakeman and Jason Morris. Now, in the paper, we had also put the next day, Saturday, was coincidentally our Safe Kids Day. There's a Safe Kids organization, and they were putting on something over here at our city park in downtown. They were giving away bicycle helmets and pads and doing all kinds of things like that. So what we had arranged to do for the kids, we had set up a soccer camp.
Because soccer's pretty big in Jamaica.
It is. And these guys all played soccer. And so we thought the best way to invite the kids was to come down and play soccer with the Jamaican Bobsled Team. And so there we were, probably 11 o'clock in the morning, maybe noon was when it started. And there's a field there, and the city had set up some posts and things for the soccer. Just come and practice with the Jamaican Bobsled Team. And I think there were estimates of somewhere between 200 and 300 kids showed up.
Wow.
The other interesting story, when it came out in the paper here in Evanston on Tuesday, it came out in the Salt Lake Tribune on Friday, the day they arrived. And it was on the front page. And of course, my goal was to get publicity for Evanston. My goal was to wake up the world and say Evanston is the back door to the 2002 Olympics. The people driving in from Denver, people driving in from Omaha, people driving in from Chicago, stop and stay here in Evanston. You're 45 minutes to the downhill events, and you won't have all of that traffic hassle driving up from Salt Lake City. That was kind of the goal at the time, was to promote Evanston. And at the same time, offer the Jamaican Bobsled Team really what it was, a home away from home. Once again, it was just this good feeling that, hey, something may come out of this. And that's what I remember of that day, that Saturday. I think we went to dinner that night at one of the local restaurants. Then on Sunday, the plan was, there's a restaurant in Park City, reading the story in the Friday paper, had gotten a hold of me and said, we'd like to invite the team to come to dinner in Park City. And I thought, okay, yeah, you guys in Utah, you're waking up to the fact, you know. So we went down, and Sunday we had planned to go to Park City to see the track, to get an up-close and personal look at the bobsled track. The track is a trough, and it's made of concrete, and buried in the concrete are tubes, and it's a refrigerated track. It's just like your freezer at home. And there was a sawhorse at the end of the track, and there was a sign on the sawhorse that said, please do not walk on the track. You know, when you're bobsledding, before the competition begins, they start at the bottom and they walk up the track. They have spiked shoes, and they'll be with their coach, and they'll be looking at the ice. They'll be determining the type of ice depending on the temperature and humidity. And they'll be discussing the nuances of the track with their coach. What do I do here? What do I do there? And so it's very common for them to walk on the track, even though there's a sign that says, please do not walk on the track. And so they get out on the track, and I'm looking at the ground. Don't get on the track, please. I'm a lawyer. I don't want you trespassing. And sure enough, the sports park truck comes up, parks in the parking lot. The guy's right there, and he's halfway out of the truck when he yells at him, "Get off the track!" Devin turns to him and he says, "We're the Jamaican Bobsled Team, and we just want to take a closer look at the track." He says, "I don't care who you are. Get off my track." Turned out that this guy and Devin knew each other from the Calgary Olympics.
Oh, really?
This guy had been on the track workers cruise, and he was like in charge of this track. Even after they recognized each other and shook hands and they were talking, he says, "I don't want you on my track. Don't walk down my track. There's a path, walk down the side." And finally, Devin and the guys decided that was the proper thing to do. So that was our meet and greet weekend. And we barely made it to the airport. And it was the first week of June. Devin was actually on a tour for the Jamaican Bobsled Team with their sponsor, Red Stripe Beer. He called me from his motel room and he confirmed. He says, "We liked what we saw. We'd like to come to Evanston. We'd like to train and get ready for the Nagano Olympics."
To get ready for Nagano?
This was 97, remember?
Oh, okay, right. Were you surprised that they wanted to come that early and not just for the Salt Lake Games?
When I first learned of it, I was surprised, but then it just became a natural thing. I didn't object, nobody else. You're the first guy, I think, that's ever asked that question. So it was this first week of June when Devin called and confirmed, "We want to come to Evanston." And I remember his words. He said, "So look for a place for us to live because we want to come as early as August. We want to train there August, September, and in October because the season begins officially on November 1st. About an hour after I talked to Devin, I get a phone call. And it is a writer living in Park City. He writes for various magazines. And his question was, whatever became of that thing with the Jamaican Bobsled Team? And I said, "Oh, well, by coincidence, I just talked with Devin Harris today, the team captain, and he confirmed that they want to come to Evanston and they want to use Evanston to train for the Nagano Olympics." And the guy got really excited. He says, "I also write for the newspaper. Do you mind if I submit this story to the Salt Lake Tribune?" He says, "This means they've named Evanston as their North American training base." And I thought, well, that sounds good. Yeah, they've named Evanston as their North
I guess so.
A month later, left-hand column, Jamaica commits to coming to Evanston.
Hey guys, this is Steve Owens from Fascination Street Podcast here with a very important message. I'm awesome. I bet you thought I was going to say something else, but nope. What's important here is that I am awesome. I started this show because I truly believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear those stories. In the short time I've been doing this show, I've interviewed actors, directors, writers, inventors, podcasters, musicians, pro athletes, Olympic athletes, actual war heroes, even a Bond girl and a luthier, whatever the hell that is, and of course, regular people. From people who wanted to be stars but never gave it a real try, to big company CEOs and people who got to meet their favorite president. I love getting to meet and speak with people who have a story to tell. I feel like everyone does, and it's my job to get them to tell it. You never know who my next guest will be. An Academy Award-winning actor, a platinum-selling musician, or your own mother-in-law. But one thing is for certain, you will be fascinated by their story. So come take a walk with me down Fascination Street. You can find Fascination Street Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and of course, FascinationStreetPod.com. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo
from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.